Right. Check, check. Okie dokie. Hi, everyone. How's everybody doing today? Excellent. Let's see. Oh, only 36 people. Must be the weather. Well, today's going to be kind of fun because I thought we would begin with another thought experiment. Um, this one's it's kind of half Derek Parfit's teletransporter thought experiment, half Star Trek transporter thought experiment. But I'd like to spend a good little while hashing this out um, before we finish off brain views of the self and then move on to substance views of the self. So let's get the old screen share going. Now, so recall last time we opened with the ship of Theseus. The ship of Theseus is the ship of the legendary founder of Athens, Theseus. And the idea there was that we decided to keep this ship uh, as a museum ship, as it were. Visitors can come and check it out. But the ship sits in port for many, many years, and over time, pieces of the ship need to be replaced. So throughout the years, this continues. And eventually, not one bit of the original ship of Theseus is left. It's been replaced entirely over many, many, many years. And the question was whether the ship is the same or not the same. And if it's not the same, when did it become a different ship? Right. And there are obviously different answers to this question. You might say that, it's the same ship because even though it's not made of the same materials anymore, it continued to exist as old parts were taken out and new ones put in to replace those old parts. The ship continued to exist. So there was continuity there, and that's what was important. Others would say that it's a different ship because it is made out of entirely different materials. Just look what happens if we take the old ship and put like all the parts and put them together. Now, which one is the ship of Theseus? Now, if we put all the old parts back together again, it seems to look like what we've got sitting in the harbor is merely a copy of the ship. Um, and we ran into some interesting metaphysical quandaries last time as well when we were talking about duplication problems. So if I duplicate myself, so if I am the you and I make copies of me such that there are now two copies, you1 and you2, are those two entirely new people? Have I ceased to exist? Or do I continue to exist in one of them? We just can't tell which one. Or do I continue to exist in both U1 and U2? Right? Really depends on what your criterion for or criteria for personal identity are. But let's consider another thought experiment, which is kind of similar to the ship of Theseus. It's Parfit's teletransporter thought experiment. And this comes from Parfit's book, Reasons and Persons. So if you want to know more about this, check that out. The idea is very similar to the matter energy transporter device that we see in the Star Trek franchise. So here, just get myself out of the way. So here we've got some people beaming down or perhaps beaming up on the transporter. The idea behind the transporter device of Star Trek fame is that it converts the matter in your body to energy, beams you wherever you want to go, via some kind of energy beam, a transporter beam, and then rematerializes you, takes that energy, turns it back into matter, and puts you back together um, at your destination. The interesting story behind this is that in the original Star Trek show, with William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy and all those guys back in the 60s, um, they didn't have the budget. Every time, the crew of the Enterprise wanted to go to another planet, they didn't have the budget to do, to have them in some kind of shuttle to film the shuttle leaving the ship and landing and taking off. Um, they didn't have the budget to build those sets and to do that extra filming. So they said, why don't we just invent a device that just transports you there? And that is how the transporter device was conceived. Parfit's teletransporter works very similarly to the transporter on Star Trek. It can beam you, as it were, to different locations. So maybe I don't know. We have the opportunity to take the transporter to take a trip to Mars. How does this work? Well, it takes you apart, molecule by molecule, um, effectively destroying you, and then it rebuilds you at your destination from a blueprint that it makes when it's taking you apart. So, whether it's like the Star Trek transporter, where you're converted to energy and then back to matter, here you're taken apart and then put back together, made out of energy. There's matter energy equivalents at play here. Um, you're put together again at your destination on Mars, rebuilt as it were. Would you take the transporter? And if you would, why? Or if you wouldn't, more importantly, if you would not take the transporter, why wouldn't you take the transporter? So this is where I'd like to get some discussion going. You know, the point of thought experiments, once again, is not that they represent plausible scenarios that may happen. I mean, we're so far away from this type of technology, if indeed it is even possible, right? This may not be possible. Forget the problem of converting matter to energy. I mean, normally when we convert matter to energy, we're talking about, nuclear fission or nuclear fusion, right? My body has enough mass in it that if you were to convert it to energy, I would basically be like a human nuclear bomb, right? So, yeah. Forget about that. Forget about the computational problems. Like the human body is so complex that to make a blueprint of it, the computational power required for that would be insane. Forget about those technical limitations and just ask yourself, would you take the transporter if you could? So Becky Barner says, might rearrange your brain some. Yeah, maybe you don't get put back together the right way. Maybe you're just a pile of goo when you get to Mars because it fails to put you together the right way. That's a legitimate worry. There's the worry that the technology might fail, right? Or that it might not be you, like Funmi says, right? If you're rebuilt, it's not, is it you or are you a duplicate of you? Um, and Jose, yeah, you seem to share this a similar fear. Um, what if it goes wrong? But also, what if it doesn't copy that consciousness? What if it's it could be like a philosophical zombie stepping out of that transporter, right? So Nick says no. Consciousness might okay, yeah, same as Jose. So this is the idea of a philosophical zombie. Um, the idea there is that we've got a creature that is physically identical to you, but without conscious experience. So if there's something really special about consciousness, something non-physical about consciousness, then would the transporter put together a philosophical zombie instead of you? Maybe. That's a worry. Definitely understand that worry. Becky would take if she was late for school. That's good. Yeah, Shane, if it was safe. Yeah. So no worries, let's just say the technology is safe. You won't rematerialize as a powder of goo. Well, yeah, Connor, interesting question. Does it use the same atoms? Not really. Because it's either taking your matter, converting it to energy, and then converting that energy back to matter, or it's taking you apart, making a copy of you, and then using some other store of energy to put you back into a material form. Muhammad says no. Yeah, Jose, no. Bronwyn says it's pretty neat, but wouldn't take it. Okay, Sruthi, that's interesting. You're kind of curious. That's cool. What would it be like? Yeah. Yeah, Nick, yeah. Yeah, like when you take the transporter, do you cease to exist momentarily? Right, kind of like Locke's memory criterion, remember from last week, when you fall asleep or undergo anesthesia, um, Locke would say that, well, actually, you cease to exist momentarily. Maybe something happens like that when you take the transporter. Yeah, where do you go? Maybe you just blink out of existence because you're not conscious. Yeah, and that's the question. Does the transporter actually transport you, or does it just kill you and make an identical copy of you? That is the question. Braden would do it. Yeah, I mean, when you watch Star Trek, and I watch a lot of Star Trek, it's no big deal. It's like, oh, we're just gonna beam down to the planet. There's no problem. I'll be me when I get there. The transporter isn't really killing me and then rebuilding me from new. Whenever I take the transporter. Although there are characters who are not interested in taking the transporter. In the original series, Dr. McCoy, famously, damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not so and so, not the other thing, whatever other thing was pertinent to the situation. He did not want to take it. Didn't like the transporter. Yeah, yeah, good point. Like this right here. So Funmi says, yeah, it definitely kills you. And then Braden says, well, even if it did kill you, I mean, is it painful? Do you remember dying? I mean, the last thing you remember when you rematerialize is stepping onto the pad and starting to dematerialize. So for the you that is beamed down to the planet, um, it's no big deal, right? But I get it. I mean, some people, even on Star Trek, some people don't want to take the transporter. But your answer to this question might tell you something about what you believe about personal identity. Parfit sounds to me like he would take the transporter because Parfit is like a bundle theorist when it comes to the self. There is really no stable, continuously existing unified self. So there's no problem with taking the transporter. There's not really a self that you can lose in the way that ego theorists understand the self. That is, as a unified, continuously existing entity. And note that even in science fiction, right, the transporter does not always work properly. Um, so there's a few episodes, and I'm sorry for nerding out so much here about Star Trek, but it is actually a pretty philosophical franchise, and there's some interesting thought experiments that happen. There's a fun episode of the original series where Captain Kirk is duplicated in this transporter accident. The episode is The Enemy Within. And the result is that we get like a good yet indecisive and, kind of like uncertain Kirk, and then an evil Kirk. And they have to figure out how to remerge the two halves of Kirk's personality by going through the transporter again. So that's a fun one. But really pertinent to our purposes is the episode of The Next Generation, Second Chances. So years before the events of this episode, Commander Riker, who is the first officer of the Starship Enterprise, he was on this away mission where they were having some trouble with the transporter, having some trouble beaming him up. But they got it figured out. They beam him up, and he goes on with his life. 10 years later, they go back to this place where this away mission took place, and they discover that in the process of transporting Riker out of there, part of the signal was deflected back toward the planet. So what ended up happening is that one Commander Riker rematerialized on the starship, and another rematerialized on the planet. Each one thought that they were the only one until they discover, oh, shoot, there's two of us. Which one is Commander Riker? Yeah, they were identical up until the point of the accident. At that point, one Commander Riker is off in space living his life, and the other is trapped on this planet for like a decade until the Enterprise comes and picks him up and finds out he's there, because no one knows he's there, right? They thought, oh, Riker beamed up. Well, they both decide to continue on with their lives. Yeah, he was just left there because they didn't realize he was there. So lame, very lame. But when they discover him there, they rescue him, and this one is interesting because here it's kind of decided, well, that the one that made it off the planet, that's Commander Riker. And the one who was stranded on the planet actually changes his name. He starts going by his middle name, so he's the copy. But really, it's like, well, who is the copy? Maybe original Riker ceased to exist the first time he took the transporter, and it's been copies ever since, right? The darkest one is from an episode of Star Trek Voyager called Tuvix. And here, two characters, Tuvok and Neelix, are merged into one person via a transporter accident. And this one person starts going by the name Tuvix. And he's a combination of both these characters. And yeah, he had the memories of both people. So he's both Tuvok and Neelix, but he's also a new individual person. And the question of the episode is, what do we do about Tuvix? Because we have a new life form here with the memories of the previous two, with his own consciousness, with his own set of rights, and we have two crew members who seemingly have died. Tuvok and Neelix are gone now. Now it's just Tuvix. But here was the kicker. They figured out a way to separate Tuvix back into Tuvok and Neelix. So what do we do? Do we accept that Tuvok and Neelix are dead and just, invite Tuvix to be a member of the crew? Or do we kill Tuvix and separate him back into our original two characters? If you've seen the episode, you know why I'm saying this is the darkest example. Has anyone happened to have seen this episode? Yeah, he begs for his life. and Captain Janeway. Oh boy, when you get okay, so sorry for spoiling this for you, but yeah, Tuvix begs for his life. Janeway, Captain Janeway arguably committed murder by separating Tuvix back into Tuvok and Neelix. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of interesting thought experiments on Star Trek. And these ones to do with the transporter really get to some of the same questions to do with personhood, personal identity, the nature of the self. Same kind of metaphysical questions that you do in a philosophy class, right? In fact, I think I think that probably Star Trek is one of the main reasons why I became a philosopher. If I'm thinking about it, when I think about it. So when Tuvix is separated, do they remember being one person? Yeah, they do, and that's kind of the thing that I supposed to the thing that is supposed to make it okay. It's like, oh, Tuvok and Neelix each remember being Tuvix, so it's like Tuvix is the real Tuvix was inside of us all along. But nah, it's still murder. There's actually a big divide in the fandom whether Captain Janeway is a murderer or whether she didn't do anything wrong when she ordered Tuvix to be untuvixed. Um, so yeah, yeah. The trouble with tribbles, that's the original series one, right? Um, with those tribbles, with those little creatures, those that they purr like weird space hamsters. Yeah, and it looks silly now, right? Because the special effects are so simple back in the original series. Um, but you don't watch Star Trek for the special effects necessarily. I mean, they're pretty awesome now. There's a lot of new Star Trek on television now, and the effects look amazing. Um, but in the 60s and then later in the 80s and 90s, some of the effects haven't aged very well. You don't watch it for that. You watch it for the interesting questions that it raises. Yeah. Do they have a transporter in Spy Kids? Oh, I've never seen that one, but um I guess the same questions would apply to that device. Okay. So same issue, really. The same issue arises if you're teleported or like, hey, it's kind of like, oh, squeeze like, oh, okay. I don't think I'd want to take that one. Um, oh, like okay. It's almost like it puts you through a wormhole or something. Interesting. Yeah, I don't think I'd want to take that one. Or it reminds me also of The Fly, which is an old science fiction movie, early Jeff Goldblum. Um, yeah, so he has the transporter device, but the fly goes into the transporter when he's beaming, and so he merges with the fly. You know, kind of like a Tuvix scenario, but with a fly. Science fiction is wonderful. It's so philosophical. I love it. So anyway, very cool metaphysical and moral questions here that parallel what we're doing here. So there's a little thought box in the textbook on Parfit's transporter experiment, but I thought I should mention these three scenarios, each from a different iteration of Star Trek, because they all raise some interest, either metaphysical or moral problems, or both, right? Um, Another interesting thing is cases of split brains. So we'll get back to the talk of the brain. Now, split brains. This was a procedure that was done starting in the 1950s. Scientists realized that they could treat cases of epilepsy. Um, oh yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. This is a preserved human brain. I forget where it is. I think it's a museum somewhere. Anyway, you can go and you can hold the brain at this museum, which sounds pretty cool. I'd do it. I'd hold a brain. Yeah, these things here, these ridges are called gyri, and these grooves are called sulci. So gyrus and sulcus, or gyri and sulci. This is the midline right here, dividing the two cerebral hemispheres. Oh, really? Do you mind if I ask which part they removed? Because there's the commissurotomy, where they cut the corpus callosum and the anterior commissure. But they also used to do one where they remove parts of the hippocampus. That's what happened to the famous patient HM. They removed most of his hippocampus and he lost the ability to form new memories. That's how we learned that the hippocampus was important for forming memories. So, okay, yeah, probably. Probably the commissurotomy, I think is what it is. Okay. Um, So yeah, we learned that oh, there's a typo. It never fails. I always have a typo. Cases of epilepsy could be treated by severing the corpus callosum and the anterior commissure. These are networks of neurons that join these two cerebral hemispheres together. And when this is done, interesting things happen. It was found very early on that these split brain patients operated like they had two brains in their head. Their two half brains could function independently of one another. And some weird stuff can happen with split brain patients. So, in the book, for example, one example is the case of a man whose two hemispheres are at odds with one another. One hemisphere is buttoning his shirt, and then the other hand comes along and unbuttons the shirt. Um, because these two brains are doing something different from one another, right? By the way, um, the brain is organized contralaterally, which means information from the left side of space is processed on the right side of the brain. Information from the right side of space is processed on the left side of the brain. Um, the right side of the body is controlled by the left side of the brain. The left side of the body is controlled by the right side of the brain. So that's the contralateral or opposite side organization of the brain. And this is important. So if I'm a split brain patient, maybe my right brain is buttoning my shirt with my left hand, but my left brain is unbuttoning it with my right hand. Yeah, that's right. This is, I believe, related. It kind of is. I'm not sure if it's the exact same pathology, but it sounds related to anarchic hand syndrome, where one hand is doing one thing and the other hand then comes and undoes it, right? Or sometimes there's a sort of a deficit with doing certain kinds of tasks. So most people's language centers are on the left side of their brain. Not everyone, but most people's. Um, so your speech centers specifically are on the left side. So if I'm a split brain patient, um, and you put an apple in my right field of view, um, I will not be able to tell you what that is because the info or sorry, no, that's not right. The information will go to that side of the brain if it's in the right side of space. And because my language processing, my speech areas are on the left side, I can tell you what that is. But then if I put the apple in my left field of vision, well, that information is going to the right side of my brain. But because the hemispheres are disconnected, this side can't communicate with this side where my speech center is. So if you put an apple on the right side, information goes to the left side where my speech center is, and I can say that's an apple. Move the same apple over here, and I cannot say what it is because the information goes to the right hemisphere and it cannot then go across to the left where the speech center is. But here's the really weird part. Yeah, Michael, that's exactly right. You could draw the apple. You could not say apple, but you could draw a picture of the apple. Far out. So there's some very weird stuff that happens in split brain patients. It's kind of like that you've got two brains in one head. So Casey says, okay, so Casey's cousin. Oh, that's interesting. Wow, oh man, that's rough for your cousin. Autism and epilepsy do have a high comorbidity rate. Just in case for anyone who's not sure about that, that means that uh, if you have one, you're more likely to have the other. Um, than say as opposed to somebody who doesn't have one of those, right? So there's a high comorbidity rate, autism and epilepsy. So he needed an operation. Oh wow. Oh, oh, Casey, that's really interesting. Do you know why? It's probably because the seizures were inhibiting some of that functioning. So the seizures go away, and now it sounds like he can live a lot more independently now because the seizures aren't interfering as much. Wow, good for him. Good for him. Was it this kind of procedure? If you don't mind me asking? Wow, yeah. Yeah, because that can happen. Sometimes, the part of the brain that's working okay is working overtime to handle the part of the brain that's having the seizures. Um, if you can stop the seizures, then there's more cognitive resources available, right? Used to have okay, yeah. I had a partner, my high school girlfriend actually was like that. She kind of grew out of it. And that does happen sometimes. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Okay. Wow. Well, I'm really glad your cousin is doing better and able to live a little bit more independently now. That's really great for him. That's awesome. Because epilepsy on its own can be pretty tough, and autism on its own can be pretty tough. Imagine you got them together. Um, it's tough. It's tough. Yeah. Oh, I love modern medicine. You know what? That's one of my nightmare scenarios is if I was grew up in a time without modern medicine, medical science, like, ooh, there was a time when people with autism or people with mental illnesses, um, we thought that was demons, for goodness sake, right? We'd be doing exorcisms or drilling holes in people's heads, or lobotomizing people. Oh, what a horrifying prospect. So, you know, um, yeah, lobotomies, man. Glad we're past that. That's what I'll say. Now, split brains, let's say oh yeah, yeah, I mean well, I don't know about serial killers specifically, but yeah, I mean, damage to the brain can change your personality and your behavior, your perhaps your cognition or your perception. Yeah, I mean, damage to the brain, specific damage, like as in specific areas, will cause very specific deficits. Um, Well, some people say that. Some people, like when we were talking about the nature of mind, identity theorists might say that. They would say that, well, the mind just is the brain. But substance dualists would say, well, the mind is actually the soul or a thinking substance. Property dualists would say that there is only physical stuff, but mental properties are non-physical properties that happen when matter is organized in the right way. So there's lots of different answers to that question. So split brains, I mean, let's extend this idea as if there are two brains in one person's head. They get their corpus callosum and the anterior commissure severed. So now there's no connection between these two hemispheres. It's just two brains, two half brains that can function independently. Let's extend that idea. Imagine that we've got a dying patient, medical patient, their body is dying, and maybe half of their brain is dying too. But we can save our patient. In the book, I believe her name is Kirsten. We can save Kirsten by transferring all of her mind into one hemisphere. Um, oh yeah, yeah, definitely. The body has a lot to do with it as well. Yeah. Oh, and chronic pain. Yeah. Like I remember when I was in graduate school, I had sciatica for like 2 years straight. I don't know what happened. Um, but I had sciatica because of a bulging disc in my lower back, which was impinging on the sciatic nerve on my right side. And I was in constant pain, not the most severe pain in the world, mind you, but just constant pain for about 2 years. And it was just exhausting. You know, it didn't hurt, like it wasn't like, broken bone pain or anything like that, but it was just exhausting being in pain all the time. Um, yeah, yeah. And I think it just, in my case, it's because I'm tall. Um, and um, the thing that did it for me was walking. Um, and eventually it just kind of went away with walking and with anti-inflammatory medication. So now I don't have that problem anymore. But yeah, it's exhausting. And you get really grumpy and hopeless. Like, oh, am I going to be this way forever? It sucks. So anyway, so split brains. Um, so we've got our Kirsten, our dying patient. We could save her. We have to transfer all of her mind uh, into another hemisphere. We want to we get all of her mental life out of the brain, um, into one half of the into the functioning half, but then we want to make a copy of that half in case something goes wrong. So we make a copy of the living hemisphere where all of her mind is now, um, and we put these in a new person. Is it the same person as before? If you are one of the same brain view proponents, well, sure she is. She's definitely the same person. Different body, not a problem. Which is not to say that the body is not important. I mean, what do we think? I mean, imagine if we do this, we transplant the brain, and there's two scenarios. Let's add to this thought experiment. One scenario is that we transfer the brain to a clone of Kirsten's body. On the other scenario, we transfer it to a completely different body. It's like a donor body. It wasn't Kirsten's. It was someone else's, but their brain died. But we kept their body in maybe like cold storage in case someone needs a body. Now, if we transfer Kirsten's brain to her clone body, is that still Kirsten? Let's see what we all think in the chat. Yep. They can survive. In fact, this is called a hemispherectomy. Sometimes we have to do this in cases of severe seizures. Sometimes an entire hemisphere is removed. So Shane says, yeah, it'd still be Kirsten, but a little different. Connor says, yep. Well, in our experiment, what we've done is we've managed to put everything in one half of the brain. Well, that's a possibility. And that's what the split brain cases are really supposed to highlight. Is that maybe in split brains there are two competing consciousnesses and just the dominant hemisphere wins out, right? That's one of the possibilities. Mm-hmm. No, the donor body has no brain, so it doesn't. The donor body in this case is Kirsten's clone body, so it's just her body, no brain. So if we put her brain in that body, it's probably still Kirsten, right? Maybe. But what if we put Kirsten's brain in a different body? Maybe we put her brain in I don't know, Sarah's body. So she's got Sarah's body now, but um all of her memories and her consciousness and everything are still there. So it's still Kirsten's brain and mind, but in Sarah's body. Is that still Kirsten? Well, the clone doesn't have any of that at all until we give it a brain, right? It's just a body. Yeah. I mean, the body must matter in some sense. Um, when it comes to I don't think like a lot of people's intuition I think is to say that the brain or the mind or some part of the mind um well, maybe it depends. Like some people have different views whether the self is in the brain or part of the brain, or whether it's a non-physical thing separable from the brain, or whether the self is really a matter of the brain and the body, right? Like I think a lot of people's intuitions align with the idea that if you had the same brain or the same mind but a different body, you would still fundamentally be the same person. Um, but I don't know about that. So for example, well, it's not that the body belongs to the brain. Let me tell you what I mean. Okay, um, so I have this intuition that if I took my brain out of my body and put it in someone else's body, that I would just be me in a different body. That's the intuition that I used to sort of have. Um, but would that really be me in there? It seems like in one sense it would be, but it also seems like in some important sense the brain and body together would not be the me that I am now. Um, yeah, yeah. So it sounds like you might be a physicalist of some kind. That's okay. Yeah. Now, the reason why I say this is because, think of somebody, for example, who is transgender, right? they will have the experience that their body does not align with their sense of self. Um, so it's them in there, right? But um, but is that the same as like mind and body identity, right? Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, after all, that's why people have like transgender people, that's why some of them transition, right? Either socially or medically or both. Um, to align the body with their sense of identity, right? Yeah, the ship, maybe it's like the ship of Theseus, right? Well, I don't know. I'm Shane, that's a great question, and I'm not really the right person to answer it because I'm a straight cisgender man, right? I don't know what that experience is like. But um I mean, I do know that most people do start with a social transition if they're going to transition. But I know just from what I've read and through speaking with people, I know that the medical interventions do also help in many, many cases, but not everyone chooses to do it. Because it's a big undertaking. It's something that you've got to really think a lot about, and you've got to work with your medical professionals. And I mean, I'm the wrong person to ask, you know, because I just don't have that experience, right? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Ryan, that's a good point. Like if I put my brain in someone else's body, maybe I would feel wrong, right? Um, well, Jose, well, if you put, yeah, well, I might, because and it might not even be related to gender. It might just be like, what, this isn't me, It's kind of like, um, if I have my spot on the couch, but if someone else has been sitting in it, it messes my spot up. Or if I have to sit in a different spot, it's really weird. Um, you could put me in John Cena's body and I'd be like, oh wow, I'm all beefcakey. I'm a beefcake now, but I don't know. It feels weird. It's not me. It's not what I'm used to, right? So there might be a different kind of dysphoria in that case. Yeah, maybe I'd get used to it, but I don't know. I don't know if identity is that kind of a thing, right? Um, so anyway, that's just so those examples are just to highlight the importance of the body. Some people do have that intuition that it's really all about the mind or the brain or the soul. But the body is important, and I think that's evidenced by the fact that trans people will transition, right? Um, because the body in that case does not align with their identity or with a part of their identity, like well, namely gender identity, right? So yeah, the body is important. And there is also an area an interesting area within philosophy of mind, uh, an idea known as the extended mind hypothesis, and that is that mental functions like thinking, perception, and so forth actually extend out into the world via the body. So you're not just some ghost in the machine, as it were, right? A human being is a mind in a body situated within a world, not just a mind in here that could be put into a different body, no problem, right? Hmm. I don't know if if I switch bodies, if it'd be quite the same as feeling phantom pain, but perhaps similar. Maybe I expect my body to feel like it's always felt, but it feels different every time I move, or something like that. So if the brain doesn't align to the body, Even if the body changes to fit the sense of self, it would still be a body belonging to a brain, unlike you being because that doesn't fit the sense of self. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure about belonging. Um, I guess it feels like I own my body, and if I am my brain, or if I am in my brain, then in that sense, yeah, the body belongs to the brain. I suppose, yeah. I think I can see what you're saying, Maeve. Um, yeah, Milan, yeah, that's a good comment. Um, yeah, okay, that's really interesting. Face transplants, yeah, yeah. Oh, interesting. Oh, Ryan. Oh, that's great. Yeah, thank you for your perspective there. Yeah, that's perfect. So it does feel kind of sim that's really okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, like I mean, I guess yeah, well, because there's phantom pain and then there's phantom limb syndrome. They're not exactly the same, but I think I can see the connection that's being drawn between the phantom limb syndrome and well, perhaps like your situation, Ryan, right? So yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. Again, I am totally the wrong person to give a perspective on this because I do not have that perspective. Um, okay, where were we? More brains. Oh my gosh, we're only on slide number 5. Wow. The discussion has been really good today, everyone. This is great. I like this kind of thing. So, another scenario, and this is kind of like the U1, U2 copy. Kirsten's dying, but we can create two copies of her. Um, so we put copy of brain one into body number one and copy of brain two into body number two. Now, do we have one patient in two bodies or two new people? It's a branching problem. Maybe Kirsten actually ceased to exist when we made the copies of her brains. So you no longer exists. Maybe we can see the whiteboard a little better today. So this is like a branching problem, right? So we have you. Can we see that? Not really, but what are you gonna do? U1 and U2. So I'll just hold this up here so we can see a bit better. So it's a branching problem. So, here's Kirsten's doubles. So when we make this change, does you continue to exist in one of these, or does you cease to exist and now we just have two copies and we can't tell? Or does or rather we have two copies, or if you does continue to exist, maybe we just don't know which one of these is you, right? That was the thing that we ran into last time. Um, there is an answer. It's a metaphysical question that has an answer, but there's an epistemic problem, which is we cannot know what the right answer is, right? So, and then of course there are the real split brain patients. I mean, some people talk about real split brain patients as if um there are two persons or two consciousnesses in one body. It's just that one dominant hemisphere is typically winning out over the other, right? Complicated stuff. Let's go on to substance and souls. Any questions before we move on about split brains or anything else? There are other pathologies that shed light on uh, personal identity as well, or raise questions about it. Dissociative identity disorder is one, for example. This is what we used to call multiple personality disorder. Now it's called dissociative identity disorder. What's going on there, right? Um, if I am the if I have a number of alters, so if I'm the primary personality and there are alters, am I more than one person? Very interesting. So anyway, uh, any questions about any of that before we move on? All right. Well, maybe we'll just move on then. So one of the oldest views when it comes to personal identity is that you are your soul. Your soul or psyche or suke is what makes you who you are. So this is the view that was held by Plato, right? You ultimately are your soul. Souls are these divine, immortal uh, beings that get their being from the form of life itself. They survive the death of the body. And interestingly, Plato, via Socrates in the dialogue Phaedo, gives a number of arguments about why and how the soul survives the death of the body. Yes, yes, exactly. We do have the exact same issue because soul views are basically substance dualism. Yeah. So if your soul is non-physical, yeah, how does it interact with the body or the brain? And how does the body affect the soul? Yeah, exactly. We have the mind-body problem. Um, yeah, but in Phaedo, Plato has Socrates give four arguments for the immortality of the soul. We won't go through them here, but the idea is that the soul is what is fundamentally you. Um, and and it survives the death of your body, and eventually, after spending a little bit of time in the underworld, it will be re-embodied. Plato's view is known as the transmigration of the soul, and it's a bit like reincarnation um, in Hinduism, for example. But there isn't really like a karma system. Socrates does say that, oh, maybe bad people will be, um, re-embodied as animals, and good people will get to be philosophers or something, right? But it's not as systematic as like the Hindu notion of karma, right? Karma is like something you accumulate throughout your life. Um, it's not like how we talk about it today, where, oh, someone slighted me, but then something bad happened to him. So that was karma. Karma got him, right? That's not really how it works. I just have to plug my laptop in. Oh, no, so many cables. They're all tangled up together. So, really, in Hinduism, karma is more like something you accumulate, almost like I mean, this is a pretty crude analogy, but almost like XP in a video game. Um, and you want to accumulate good karma. You don't want to accumulate bad karma. So Plato doesn't really have that. Although it's possible that some of his views were influenced by the ancient Indian tradition, because the Greeks and the ancient Indians did know about each other, right? Um, But Aristotle comes along and disagrees with pretty much everything Plato has to say about souls. He says the soul is the organizing principle of living beings. It is not an immaterial entity that participates in the form of life and that survives the death of the body. I mean, and also Plato's view of the soul is not 100% straightforward either. You know, in the Meno, you get the idea that the soul is this unified thing. But in the Republic, Plato talks about parts of soul or aspects of soul, and he has this sort of tripartite or three-part understanding of the soul. The soul has an appetitive part. That is the part that regulates our appetites and our drives. So hunger, thirst, the need to sleep, right? Sex drive. These are all because you have an appetitive soul. Then you have a spirited soul. That's your emotions or the passions. Or beyond that, all kinds of physical feelings beyond the appetites, right? So the feeling of hunger is because of your appetitive soul. The feeling of courage is because of your spirited soul. And then finally we have the rational soul, which is responsible for thinking, for for logos, reason, true speech, all of that stuff that the ancient Greeks were so enthusiastic about. So um yeah, in like Phaedo, um, Plato always refers to the soul in the singular. And it's always feminine too. The soul is always she for Plato. But then in the Republic, we have this tripartite soul. You can read about the sort of analogy, the chariot analogy. Um, it's available on the internet. Just Google Plato, soul, chariot, and you'll get a bit from the Republic where Socrates is describing, how the rational soul is like the pilot of a chariot who has to keep the appetitive and the spirited soul going straight ahead, because these are like two horses that are trying to go in different directions all the time, up and down, left, right, so on and so forth. Um, yeah, that's a good question. Fear, yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure how Plato would deal with that example, to be honest. Um, because you do have a drive to escape the danger that the fear represents. Um, but I don't think that's the kind of drive that Plato has in mind. Plato means like the drives, well, maybe a fear response is a basic drive that's important for life. But I think that Plato would say it's the spirited soul that governs that. That's my guess. Granted, I'm not a scholar of Plato. I've read a bit, I've read a good chunk of him, but I'm no expert. So now Aristotle has a tripartite soul, an understanding of the tripartite soul as well. Um, all living things have soul for Aristotle, not a soul, soul. Um, Plants, for example, have nutritive souls. So if you're a plant, you have soul. Yeah, you have nutritive soul, which is the organizing principle that allows for growth, the consumption of food, reproduction, right? Plants do all of that. So plants have nutritive soul. Um, Animals have the nutritive soul and sensitive soul, which is what is responsible for locomotion. So getting around in the world, for perceiving the world, sensing the world, right? That's your sensitive soul. So plants and animals have the nutritive soul. Plants and animals have the nutritive soul, but only animals out of those have the sensitive soul. Plants don't have it, and then humans have a rational soul, which animals lack. So that's Aristotle's understanding of the soul. It is not some kind of immaterial, immortal, divine spirit. It is not. Um, this immaterial entity that is fundamentally you. So it's not like Plato's understanding of the soul. It's not like Descartes' understanding of the soul. It's not even all that much like Abrahamic understandings of the soul. Mm. Ugh. It's a very functionalist understanding of mind or of soul. That is why in the fresco, The School of Athens, Raphael depicts Plato pointing up and Aristotle pointing down, right? So here we're getting into Aristotle's theory of hylomorphism, and this comes from the ancient Greek hule, so matter, and morphe, form. So we can understand individuals and remember that individuals are primary substances. So I'm a primary substance, you're a primary substance, this desk is a primary substance. When it comes to living individuals, we can understand them as matter arranged according to a form or an organizing principle, and that is the soul. And you may find it helpful to recall further Aristotle's theory of causality, right? There are four causes in Aristotle's metaphysics, and we can understand things if we understand their four causes. We have the material cause, which is the formal, the stuff, the physical stuff that a thing is made of. We have a formal cause, which is the form taken by the entity in question. The efficient cause is what brings it into being, and the final cause, or the telos, is the purpose of the thing. And here we're talking mostly about the material and formal causes. The matter thing is made of, and the form that it takes. Let's try and illustrate this with an inanimate object and then an animate object. So name any inanimate object or a bunch of them. We'll try to understand their formal and material causes. A rock. Yes. So a rock is made of rock and takes the form of a rock. A book is a good one. So a book is made of paper and cardboard and maybe some string and some glue. So that's the material cause. And the formal cause is its form, namely the form of a book, right? Yeah. And if you want, you can talk about the efficient and final causes too. The efficient cause, what brings a book into being? Well, the author, the publisher, right? What's its final purpose? Well, to be read, to be enjoyed, perhaps to teach you something, perhaps to give you some entertainment, right? What about animate objects? Yeah, I mean, maybe it could be, but you don't just need the printing press, right? You need somebody to work the press and set it up, and of course, you need somebody to write the book. Um, a book might have a few efficient causes altogether, right? Or maybe you could analyze them separately, like the efficient cause of the story is the author. The efficient cause of the book is the person working the printing press. Maybe you could do it that way, right? Well, an animate object, let's take a human being. I'm my material cause is all the stuff all the stuff I'm made of. Excuse me, everyone. So we're talking, water, carbon, iron, calcium, all the chemicals that make up a human body. But the organizing principle is the form that I take. This living being, this animal with reason. Now, when it comes to living beings, it is the soul that informs matter. This is something called entelechy, that all matter has. All matter can be informed. That is all matter. All matter can be made into something by giving it a form. What is it that individuates beings? It can't be the form for Aristotle. It's got to be the matter. The reason I'm different from you is because I'm made of different physical stuff. I'm a different unity of organized matter than you are. That's what's important for Aristotle. And I believe the analogy in the book is of a whole bunch of candle holders, right? The form cannot be what individuates the candle holders because they all have the same form. So it's the matter, the stuff that they're made out of, that individuates different entities for Aristotle. Now, Aristotle's he takes a bit of a turn from Plato, his teacher, and he's hugely influential in the Middle Ages during the medieval period. So we should ask, what about medieval understandings of the soul? And here's where we get to Thomas Aquinas, who used Aristotle's theory to try and answer questions in Christian theology, specifically Catholic theology, about what happens to the soul after death. Now, I think I've mentioned this before, but Aquinas was a very big follower of Aristotle, very big Aristotelian. He calls Aristotle the philosopher in his writings, as if Aristotle is the only philosopher worth bothering about, right? Now, Aristotle wasn't, what happened after death was not really a question for Aristotle. Wasn't really worried about that. It's like, what happens after death? Well, you're dead. But Aquinas, because he's Catholic, he wants to establish, firstly, that the soul survives death, but also that your personal identity survives death. So in Catholicism specifically, the idea is that when you die, the soul is separated from the body. The body is buried. Eventually, one day after, I believe, the day of judgment, or during the day of judgment, your body is resurrected, and then you have to face your final judgment, right? I'm actually not sure to the extent that other areas of Christianity agree on this. You'll have to excuse my ignorance here. I was actually not brought up religious, right? I never went to church or anything. So I actually don't know. I actually don't know. Can someone help us out? Like I know on Catholicism, this is the idea, right? The day of judgment happens, God gets everyone to resurrected, and it's like, okay, now we're gonna see about all your sins and everything and see if you get to go to heaven, right? I think maybe some forms of Protestantism are like, no, you go to heaven right away, but I don't know. I honestly don't know. What was the question? The question is in Catholicism, you die, and then eventually, on the day of judgment, your body is resurrected and you face judgment. Is it like that in everything else, all the other Christianities? Oh, Jose says, so when you die, you go directly to heaven, but you did sleep through Sunday school. That wasn't explained. Okay. Super. Yeah. Oh man. That is excellent, Shane. Okay, so Lutherans, you go right to heaven. Oh, really? Oh, then I guess is that a new thing, or because I mean in the book of Revelations it's pretty clear. Huh. That might be a relatively new thing. I don't know. It doesn't really make any sense to me either way. But uh Oh, maybe it's not judgment. Maybe it's the kingdom of heaven after the day of judgment, after Jesus fights the Antichrist or something. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not a theologian. Yeah. Beam me up, Jesus. Or what does God need with a starship? If you've seen that one, I know you're a Trek fan. Um, yeah, I honestly don't know. Okay, let's just say at some point your body's supposed to be resurrected. What happens between death and resurrection? Well, our Aquinas actually said that, well, without a body, your soul continues to exist, but you don't continue to exist. So, unlike Plato, your soul is not essentially you. Your soul and your body are you. But when your body dies and the soul is off by itself, you technically don't exist. Your soul does, but you do not. Like yeah, it says here, the soul, you're just chilling. The soul, since it is part of man's body, it's the organizing principle of a body. Remember, Thomas is an Aristotelian, is not an entire man, and my soul is not I. So kind of similar, but kind of different from Plato's view. Do we have time for this last slide? Yeah, I think so. Richard Swinburne argues something very similar to Plato. He says that the soul is just what constitutes your personal identity. And all our mental states, our entire psychology, are really just states of the soul. So he writes, souls are immaterial subjects of mental properties. They have sensations and thoughts, desires and beliefs, and perform intentional actions. Souls are the essential parts of human beings, and humans have sensations, etc., and perform intentional actions in virtue of their souls doing so. Okay, but what is it that makes my soul my soul? Souls are non physical, so what is supposed to differentiate one soul from the next? Well, my soul just is my soul because my soul has a thisness to it, or a Hasiety, Hasiety. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm not going to lie. I don't know how to pronounce that word. Um, but this thisness is borrowed from John Duns Scotus, medieval philosopher. John Duns Scotus, by the way, is Latin for John from Scotland. So there was this guy, John, he was from Scotland. Latin was the lingua franca, so he became known as John from Scotland. So that's kind of fun. Um, Souls just have this thisness or this hasiety, hasiety. I'm gonna have to look up how to pronounce that. But they have this thisness, and it's just sort of a basic metaphysical fact about souls that they have this thisness, that my soul has a thisness that makes it uniquely mine, and yours has a thisness that makes it uniquely yours, right? Ah, hexiety. Thank you, Casey. Hexiety. Latin is a language that I have very little familiarity with, and this comes from the Latin. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. Now, okay, I realize we kind of rushed through Swinburne there, but we did have a very cool bunch of conversations about transporters and brains and bodies and identity. That was awesome. So great. That's sufficient for this chapter. Next week, we're going to look at the penultimate chapter of the textbook, and that is the chapter on free will, chapter 10. Sometime late this evening, quiz 2 will open. It will be open until next Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. I have shortened it significantly. It will only have 20 true, false, or multiple choice questions and 4 short answer questions. Um, It's like last time. It's open book, but once you start the quiz, which you can start anytime between Wednesday evening and 11:59 p.m. next Wednesday, you'll only have 90 minutes. So I do recommend reviewing your notes before you start. The material covered will be from perception through till the nature of mind. So it's perception, universals, things, nature of mind. Who's the Messiah? Me, the messenger. Wait, why? I don't get it. Oh, yeah, I guess so. I mean, least I could do. Well, a lot of students, not everyone, but some students did have trouble with that time limit. I think it's probably not so much the multiple choice, but the short answers are what really messed with people's time time allotment. So there'll probably just be like one short answer question per chapter. Um, and yeah, so that'll be later this evening, like later on, um, after supper time at the earliest. Yeah, so yeah, a few. Well, you wouldn't be the only one. Um, I'll try to make the language a little more plain, Casey, if I can. But that's it. That's everything about test number two. So yeah, like I say, that'll be open later this evening. Um, I'll probably put out an announcement once it's open. And after that, it'll be really just like last time, except shorter, fewer questions. So, thanks everyone. Today's discussion was really cool. I had a lot of fun talking about transporters and brains and bodies and everything. Personal identity is a really cool topic. A lot of really great stuff happening. A lot of cool metaphysical questions. So thanks everyone. Um, yeah, this was fun. I will see you all next week. Good luck with the test once it's up. Um, and yeah, have a great weekend. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Now, I think I am meeting with somebody, so I'm going to stop recording and I'm just going to wait. All right.